Esmeralda. One of the few Disney heroines to canonically become a mom. The other ones are Nala and Ariel, I believe. Well, definitely those two, but I'm trying to remember if there are any other heroines that are not either a mom in their original movie or become a mom by like their sequel movie. And I'm like, I think so. Esmeralda. Also, just one of my favorite Disney heroines in general. Disney characters in general. Doesn't have much bearing on this, but she is a mom, and I'm talking about a mom in this video. I'm also, for a bit of how the sausage is made, I'm recording this the day after Mother's Day, which is why I'm still so stuffed up because of whatever hell spawn pollen is outside right now. Fun. So, today I'm going to be talking about Makino for the paired cover page video that goes with the From the Decks of the World. I wanted to do a video about Makino for a while, and I've talked about her before, obviously. I've talked about her when I did the Mother's Day videos in regards to One Piece, because she is canonically a mom in One Piece. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And she is kind of like this mother / older sister figure for like Luffy, Ace, and Sabo type of thing, where she's watched them grow up and everything. And she very much cares for them in that regard. I mean, Dawn is essentially their mom, but Makino gets put in there as well. So I kind of wanted to talk about Makino. And it's, I don't expect Makino to have some amazing feat in the story. She kind of gets one, and I'll talk about that a little bit in this video. When I get to that in the video, I'll talk about it. But there's not really any, I'm not expecting her to, pick up a sword and start fighting against the pirates or something like that, or start fighting against the Marines if they show up looking for, asking questions about Luffy and whatnot. But I still want to talk about Makino because she is kind of this, very normal person in the One Piece world who owns a bar in this little backwater town in Fuchsia Village, on Dawn Island. And, she has, she has this connection to Luffy and Ace and Sabo. And, she has this connection to Garp because of the boys and because of living in the town and everything else like that. So she kind of has these connections to some very powerful people in the world, tangentially into Shanks and such, as well, in regards to that. She's got 2 Yonko that are very protective of her, and a member of the Revolutionary Army that is very protective of her, and a vice admiral in the Marines, one of those famous Marines, very protective of her, because of, they're all protective of the town as well, but Makino and such, and Whoop Slap and Dawn and such like that will get thrown in there as well. And so there's all of that type of thing there, where she is this very odd kind of significant person in the One Piece world, surprisingly, but the world government doesn't know that. The Marines don't know that. Garp knows. Pretty sure that Kobe and Helmeppo could piece a few things together. And such, but for the most part, it's I don't know, it's just that's the town Garp came from, and I don't care, type of thing. But into this, Makino is 31 years old, and to the best of our knowledge, she's lived in Fuchsia her whole life. That's where she was born, is the best of our knowledge. As I said, she owns and runs Party's Bar. And she's the mother of an unknown child. We'll get to the child in a bit. So the earliest that we see Makino, she was born 31 years ago, probably in Fuchsia Village, grew up there. The earliest we ever see Makino is in episode 0, or chapter 0. And that's 22 years ago, where we see Makino just sitting there kind of reading the paper as a little kid. And she would have been about 9. And we have Whoop Slap come over and ask her where Garp has gone. And he's like, oh, he's gone off into the mountains. And that's, Garp's there because he's visiting and taking care of Ace. And, putting Ace with, to Dawn and the Mountain Bandits and all of that stuff. So it's so Makino has grown up and she knows who Garp is and everything else like that. Has grown up in the village. Been around Whoop Slap her whole life. I'm pretty sure there was some theory that like maybe Garp or Makino was like Garp's daughter at some point. I'm sure that was a theory, or that like she was Whoop Slap's daughter, or some variation. But I was like, nah, she just lives in the town. That's where she's grown up. The next appearance, and her first appearance in the manga and in the story, is of course 12 years ago when she is at the bar serving Luffy, Shanks, and the rest of the red-haired pirates at her bar. By the way, quite intrepid. She was 19 at the time, and it was already her bar. So I don't know. Maybe the bar belonged to one of her parents or something, and then they died, and she got the bar or something. I don't know. Um, but she's one of like the only two villagers who dared approach. Or so essentially, what ends up happening is, and we kind of some of this can be pieced together. With just some of the additional information, we know that Shanks showed up at Fuchsia Village about a year prior, um, and kind of set up base there for his base of operations in the east for the next year. He doesn't cause any problems for the townsfolk. Made that promise to Whoop Slap, sticks to that promise to the best of his abilities, doesn't cause problems in town. Um, if you want to go by Film Red canon or Film Red, Uta's been there as well. Knows Makino. And Makino has just kind of watched this whole time as like Luffy keeps begging Shanks to let him join his crew. Um, day after day after day, it's like, please, Shanks, let me join your crew, let me join your crew, let me join your crew. And Makino is just kind of like, come on, Shanks, just humor him a little bit, take him out for a little adventure and bring him back or something. And Shanks like, no, I don't want to do that. In the Uta episode, you already have a child on your crew that has been on the crew for years at that point in time, and you guys have kept her safe. So yeah, your argument is kind of invalid, Shanks. And you were raised on a pirate ship with Roger, so your argument is kind of invalid for what's going on here. You are not the person that can logically and convincingly make this argument about not having a child on a pirate ship. Um, so, and Makino kind of like her and Shanks become friends during this time frame. I admit it, I ship Shanks and Makino. I'm not going to argue with that. I like them together. I also understand if Oda puts someone else with Makino or someone else with Shanks. But I like Shanks and Makino. And essentially what ends up happening is, of course, we meet Makino when, after Luffy has stabbed himself in the eye in the first chapter, and they're sitting at the bar, and Shanks is like fixing up Luffy's eye, the scar under his left eye, excuse me. While they're all eating and everything else like that, while the rest of the crew is eating in the background, and then of course Shanks kind of makes fun of Luffy because he drinks milk and juice as opposed to like adult drinks or whatever, and he keeps acting like a kid with Makino, and of course he has his treasure tab at Makino's bar. I'm pretty sure whenever Garp shows back up, he just pays whatever Luffy's tab is at the bar. And like Makino really loves Luffy. She's not gonna let him starve or anything like that. The town's not gonna let Luffy starve. So we get some of that. We get to see the way that she is there, and then of course she is there when they have the Higama incident where Higama shows up at the bar and is demanding liquor, and she's like, oh, I'm sorry, I just sold the last liquor to these gentlemen here, pointing at Shanks and such. And of course Shanks is just like, oh, here, you can have this instead, have this alcohol, and that of course results in the whole incident with Higama destroying the bottle, and calling Shanks weak and everything else like that, and threatening everybody and then leaving. And then of course, we have, Makino is trying to clean up all of the, the broken glass and the, wasted alcohol. And Shanks is just like, no, it's fine, and laughs it off. And of course, Luffy's like angry about this. And doesn't like all of this. And of course, Makino is there when Luffy eats the gum no Mi and gets his powers and everything else like that. Gets freaked out like everybody else. And then we cut ahead to, I'm assuming, a few days later, where Higama and his bandits show back up again, and they're, they're kind of attacking Luffy, trying to get Shanks to show back up again, and of course, Makino and Whoop Slap are trying to, appease the bandits and make them leave and everything else like that. And, Shanks and his crew show up. They kind of scare off the bandits. They kill one of the bandits, scare off the rest, and then Higuma captures Luffy and runs away. And, yeah. Yeah. And of course, this is where, of course, everything happens with, Shanks saves Luffy, loses his arm. They leave. He gives Luffy the straw hat. And of course, Luffy is still kind of left in. I'm assuming Luffy is kind of left in Makino's care most of the time before he goes to live with the Dawn. And in the live action, they kind of have that, like, Luffy seems to kind of live under the bar. They did a good job with Makino in the live action. I like how they handled her. And such. So, we have her there. And Luffy kind of seems to kind of live under the bar as, like, for where he lives and, all of that. So we get to see a little bit more of, like, him and Makino interacting in the live action. So that's kind of cute. And then we know, of course, Luffy gets taken to go live with, Garp takes Luffy to go live in the mountains with the Dawn and her crew. And gets, go meets Ace and eventually Sabo. And we know eventually that Makino and Whoop Slap go and visit. Go visit, them up in the mountains at Mount Corvo. And, Luffy's super happy to see her. And, she brought some new clothes, or at least clothes that maybe she made for Luffy and Ace and Sabo and everything. And I'm assuming that since Luffy and Ace and Sabo are now, like, brothers at that point in time, they've made that pact and everything. That, they go down to the village every now and then, see Makino, hang out in the bar. She, treats them, whatever food and juice and milk and whatever. Maybe they bring her fun stuff or whatever. I have seen adorable pictures of, like, for Mother's Day or something like that, or like for, like, Makino's birthday or whatever, where, like, the boys bring her something and, like, like Ace or Sabo brought her flowers and, like, Luffy brought her a lizard or something because Luffy or a bug of some kind. And just, like, trying to be sweet for Makino and everything else like that. And we do know that Ace kind of has a little bit of a crush on Makino because she's a pretty lady. So we kind of have that. They've been, Ace gets a little bit of a crush on Makino, so we kind of have that. And so we get some of that, and then of course we have where everything happens with Sabo. Makino would have been very heartbroken by, them believing that they lost Sabo, that Sabo was dead and everything. And what ends up happening is, of course, hi, Boo, I'm coming inside. Come on. He's like, stupid door, open. Hi, Boo. Yes, I know, you're a good boy. I know. Chip. Good baby. And what ends up happening is, Makino is, of course, probably very heartbroken when they find out about what happens with Sabo and everything. And, we go through a bunch of that. We know that Ace eventually asks Makino how to do a proper, like, thank you. And so we get, like, the cute scene of, like, Luffy, of, Makino teaching Ace how to do, like, the thank you and everything else like that, because he wants to be able to properly thank Shanks, should he ever run into him when he's out on the seas. He wants to be able to properly thank Shanks for saving Luffy, even before Luffy and Ace were brothers. And so we have that where she's helping with that, and then we cut ahead to when it's time for Ace's departure, and she's there as part of the group saying goodbye to Ace when Ace leaves and heads off on his voyage, starts heading off on his adventure. Makino and Whoop Slap and the other villagers are there because, of course, the villagers have watched Luffy and Ace grow up and are very, very proud of him and everything else like that. I kind of wouldn't be surprised if both Makino and Whoop Slap were aware of who of who Luffy's father was. I don't think until what happened at Marineford that they knew who um, Ace's father was. That he was Roger. But I kind of think Whoop Slap definitely knew who Luffy's father was with Dragon, because Whoop Slap has known Garp for a very long time. So I'm kind of thinking that maybe Makino knew that Dragon was Luffy's father, so I guess that's a possibility, but that's never been confirmed one way or the other, whether or not she knew that before that information is revealed at Marineford and then, published in the newspaper and everything. Um, but so she sends, she's, Luffy, sends, Ace off when he departs, and then of course we get to when Luffy departs, and he heads off, and she's there along with Whoop Slap and the rest of the village, sending Luffy off on his way, with his little dinghy with the barrel in it, and he's, gets sent off and everything, and she's very happy for him and proud of him. And then essentially we just kind of catch up with her almost anytime that we get information about like Luffy bounties, or something happens. So like the first time that we get caught up with Makino is during Log Town when Luffy gets his first bounty for defeating Arlong and Buggy and Krieg and all of that. And reported about him and everything. And Makino is of course very happy about all of this. And of course the townsfolk are celebrating. And Whoop Slap is just like, no, this is not good. This, they have a local famous citizen is a pirate with a bounty. This is not good. But like everybody else is just happy. And of course, it's Luffy's first bounty of 30 million. And then we don't really cut back to Fuchsia Village until we get to after when we get to the post-Enislabi arc, when they're getting their next very big bounty raise. We don't cut back there during Alabaster or anything when he gets his second bounty raise, but assumedly they're very happy for him there as well. And so we have the post-Enislabi bounty raise, and they're all very happy for Luffy, and they're a little bit like, okay, he declared war on the world government. That's not good. But they're very proud of him for, standing up to protect his friend. And she sees Chopper and she thinks that Chopper is very cute and that she's very happy that he has found these great friends. And that is that is one of the things where it's like, she's, assumedly she has been paying attention to any bounty posters that come in about Ace at that point in time. The other thing that, of course, is kind of like this plot hole in the story that comes when it comes to Sabo is like, during the same time frame, Sabo is kind of this rising star in the Revolutionary Army. He is, after the post time skip, he is the chief of staff and is like, the second most powerful, or second highest ranking member of the Revolutionary Army type of a thing. And, so it's kind of like this question of like, they wouldn't have seen the bounty posters for him. I'm sure a lot of the different Revolutionary Army members have bounties, particularly Dragon, Ivankov, all the commanders and the vice commanders and stuff like that. And Sabo, maybe Hack and Koala get thrown in there with having bounties. I don't remember if we ever got it confirmed that they have bounties, but like Sabo, I think had a bounty before that. So it's like kind of this question of like, wouldn't they have maybe noticed Sabo in the newspaper, thought that kid kind of looks a lot like Sabo, and he has the same name, and he's got the blonde hair, but he's got that scar, so maybe it's not him, but I don't know. So there's like that whole concept, because it's not like there couldn't have been someone else named Sabo out there in the One Piece world. There are two Surus. To be fair, one of them is a Marine, and the other one is in Wano, which is very isolated, so... But I don't know. There's not that many other characters in One Piece that have the same name. It's very rare that Oda does that. In the 1,600 whatever named characters, by the way. Yes, I have been voting in the poll for the popularity contest. For the second global popularity contest, I have been happily voting in it. So, so Makino is very happy that Luffy has been finding these, great friends and everything else like that. And having these wonderful adventures. Then we get into the post-war arc, so post-Marineford, and this is where we kind of get this moment where, of course, the citizens of Fuchsia Village probably, well, they wouldn't have been watching what happened at Marineford. They may have been listening if it was being broadcast on the Denten Mushi for Ace's execution. They would have been like just heartbroken with like listening to what happens, whatever play-by-play is coming out of it, and reading it in the newspaper the next day. and everything else like that. They would be heartbroken with like Ace dying and not knowing if Luffy was alive at that point in time. And they would just be like, oh God, what is happening? Oh my God, Ace is dead. What about Luffy? Is he dead too? All this other stuff. And like Makino probably would have just been like just like so distraught about that. We kind of see that a little bit later. She would have just she would just be distraught about this, and we know that the Dawn and Whoop Slap were also upset about this. And Garp shows up from Marine headquarters. He's in Fuchsia Village I think he's there to try to set up a Marine headquarters at Fuchsia Village to protect the town from the sunrise and the bandit and pirate and bandit violence after what happened at Marineford. We don't ever get a resolution to that if that's what happened. If he did end up building a Marine base there, because I don't think anytime we've cut back to Fuchsia Village we've seen anything that looks like a Marine presence there. We know there's a Marine presence in the Goa Kingdom, but we don't know how much that extends out toward Fuchsia Village. So, but so Garp is there, and that's his intention, is to get there. And then we have the scene where Dawn and Garp are just fighting, or they're fighting, and Garp is not defending himself. Dawn is just pissed at Garp, is beating him up and everything else like that. I was just like, why didn't you try to save Ace? Why didn't you try to do this? He is your grandson. Why didn't you try to save him? And everything else like that. And she's just like beating Garp over and over again about this. And then we have it that Makino steps in and gets between them, and Makino steps in and gets between them, trying to stop the fighting. And she's like, yes, look at Garp. Yes, he is suffering over the Ace's death worse than any of them. And then Luffy is suffering more than anyone right now, is suffering the most out of everyone, because he just lost his brother right in front of him after going through hell and back to try to save him and everything. And of course, they're all upset about this. And, Makino's crying and everything else like that. And she's just, crying, and it triggers, some of the memories of, Ace and Luffy as kids and everything. And she just like breaks, she just like starts breaking down into tears, and she runs off probably back into her bar and keeps crying. So assumedly there's some bits that happen to Makino during this time skip, during the 2-year time skip. Assumedly they're all just happy when they find out, or somewhat relieved when they find out that Luffy is alive. Reading that in the newspaper because of him going and ringing the Ox Bell and finding out that Luffy's alive. So there's that. And at some point in time, Makino got pregnant and had a baby during the 2-year time skip, because when we cut back from the decks of the world, we see that Makino has a child, and she is just holding her baby and rejoicing as they're reading about like Luffy's return. Her and the rest of the village are just like rejoicing, and Whoop Slap is being his curmudgeon-y self. Then we get from the decks of the world 500 Million Berry Man arc, which I'll eventually get to later in this series. And this is, of course, when Luffy gets his next bounty raise after what happens in Dressrosa. And, they're finding out that, he defeated another warlord. This is now like his third at that point in time. And, they're just celebrating, and we see like the Dawn and her family are there as well. Like the Dawn's holding the baby. To this day, we still don't know the name of this baby. There's, of course, all the theories that, this is Shanks's baby. I know there's the joke theory that it's Garp's baby, or that it's Whoop Slap's baby, or that it's just some other random villager's baby that Makino got with and had the baby. I kind of like to think it's Shanks's kid, but that's not going to be confirmed for a while, if it is confirmed, ever. So we have all of that. Then we get to the Reverie arc, and of course during the Reverie arc, Luffy gets another bounty raise and everything else like that, so she's, happy about that. We see her with her baby again, wondering how Luffy is doing. We, of course, have Whoop Slap, complaining about Luffy appearing in the newspaper again and causing more problems and everything else like that because of what's going on in Totland. Then we get into the Wano arc, and after the Reverie, Makino is, of course, very distressed by reading about the news concerning Sabo, because, of course, it's, the world, it makes it look like Sabo assassinated King Cobra. And, she's very upset about this, and she's got her bar closed, and we see her just like sitting there, just like crying while her little baby plays on the floor. And she's just so distraught about this, which is so perfectly understandable. She is just like, oh God, please don't let this be true. Please don't let Sabo have done this, type of thing. So she's very upset about that. I am going to touch on the film Red stuff here just because it's like the one movie appearance that Makino has, because we don't see her in any of the other movies. As I said, there's like the little film Red tie-in episodes where we see, Luffy and Uta as like kids, being at the bar and everything else like that, and being around Makino. So we have that, and of course in the movie, the tie-in episodes, we have it that, Makino and Whoop Slapper talking about Uta's concert and how she's like this other famous kid from Fuchsia Village type of thing, and they're all very proud of her and everything, and they're listening in at the concert on Elgia. We see during the movie that they are watching and listening to the broadcast from Elgia, and assumedly they get affected by what happens in they get sucked into the dream world type of thing. When Uta is singing is assumedly one of the things that happens to them, but we never see them in the dream world, and they obviously they end up getting freed from it if they were in there. And we kind of see them during the end of the movie where we have the Where the Wind Blows playing, well, she's just singing while Makino and such like that is moving, keeping going on with her life and everything else like that. Again, Uta canon is like, okay, I don't know where this lands for stuff. I think that if Uta is canon and like this type of a relationship was there, I think Makino would be exceedingly proud of Uta for becoming this famous singer and everything else like that and following her dream. I'm just going to leave that there. Then we get into the most recent stuff in regards to the last time, from the time that I'm recording, that's the last time that we have seen Makino. And that is during the Egghead arc. So, all the citizens of Fuchsia Village are listening in on the message from Vegapunk. So first off, we have them kind of reacting to the news about Garp's disappearance on Hachinosu. And all the town is like very worried about Garp. It's like, oh my God, what if he's dead? And Whoopsat's like, that's not going to kill Garp. It's fine. And Makino's like, no, I agree with that. I'm sure that Garp is fine. And she's holding her baby, and like the little baby is like looking at the newspaper, and of course they probably have Luffy's bounty posters up around the bar. I kind of think headcanon, there's probably some pictures of like Luffy and Ace's kids in the bar too, and Ace's Luffy and Ace as they grew up and everything like that. So the little baby is kind of used to seeing Luffy's face and all of his newspaper appearances, and like them kind of showing him the baby, or showing the baby the pictures of Luffy in the paper. And she's like, this, her baby is beginning to recognize Luffy's face from all the numerous newspaper appearances, and that's like his big brother is the way that they phrase it, for kind of how they phrase that, for like that. To be fair, Luffy has no idea this kid exists. Luffy has absolutely no reason to know this kid exists. And of course, there's the whole theory that if he is Shanks's baby with Makino, I have this fun little theory that I'm working on, just like a hair color theory for One Piece. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a fun idea where if this is true that that Shanks is Makino's baby daddy, then it just continues this trend of like whatever hair color the Figureland boys have gets rewritten by whatever the mom's hair color is, because Garling has banana hair, and both Shanks and Shamrock have like the very red, luscious hair from their mother, from Magnolia. And then if Makino is if the baby is Shanks's baby with Makino, then that hair color from Shanks is not the bright red color. It got overwritten by Makino's green hair color, which I like that they give her green hair. It's just cute. So I just think that that's adorable. I don't think that's going to go anywhere. I just think that's a cute little funny bit there for the Figureland men. It was just like, oh, the baby doesn't have my hair color. Oh, well, that's fine. Moving on. As I said, I don't expect Makino to have any major influence on what's going to happen next in the series or what's going to happen later in the series. I just think it's just going to be more of a, okay, she's here. At whatever point in time Luffy comes home, after all of his adventures are, after he becomes the king of the pirates and he makes a return trip back to Fuchsia Village and everything, so everybody can go visit their families along the way. And he gets back to Fuchsia Village, and she's just super happy to see him. And he see Whoop Slap, see Makino, see Dawn, and get to meet the little baby. He's like, oh, I'm a big brother type of thing. Is however Luffy would react to that, I'm sure. But I don't really think there's going to be much else. We might cut to Fuchsia Village at some point in time during some of the final battle stuff, depending on how that's being played out, how that's reported in the newspaper, or if that ends up getting broadcast around the world. That would be an interesting way of doing it. Taking some notes from, Vegapunk and whatnot. Assumingly she listened to the Vegapunk message. We don't see her specifically listening to it, but I'm assuming she did. And has just, has like, okay, there's not much I can do about this. Okay, I'm just gonna hope things work out for the better. So we get that. So that's what I have here from Makino. I thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. We have Chip in the background, who's a good little baby. Yes, you are. And I hope you all have a nice rest of your day. Bye.